Hello, welcome to this JavaScript interview question about prototypes. All right, so here we have the overall question. The first thing that happens is that there's this constructor function for an artist. And then there's this musician class which extends that artist constructor function. Each musician has a name, talent, and an instrument. And the example instance in this one is Frank Sinatra, who is a singer. His talent is voice, or rather instrument is voice. And then there's some business with the object.prototype.info part, and that's bound to be the part where it gets a little tricky. And the actual prompt is, what is the output if you call frank.info? Okay, to start digging into this, let's comment out everything except for this constructor function around the artist. So go ahead and highlight from musician all the way down to frank info and then comment it out. Now let's create two instances of this artist constructor function. First, we're going to have one called Monet. So this constant is Monet, which is going to be an instance of the artist. Note that you have to use the new keyword to make an instance of this constructor function. That way, this object is created to represent that unique instance. So that's why you need the new keyword. The name for Monet is going to be the string Monet, and Monet is a painter. Then let's go ahead and make a second instance, Donatello, set to an instance of this artist constructor function. The string is Donatello, and for the talent of Donatello, he is not a painter, but a sculptor. Okay, so now we have two different instances of this artist constructor function. Let's go ahead and log both of them. First, we're going to log Monet, and then we'll also have a label for Monet, so the first argument is going to be a string. Likewise, let's console.log Donatello, and then the second argument in this log is going to be the Donatello object itself. So once you have all of that, go ahead and give the entire REPL a run. And you should see that Monet is indeed an instance of the artist object with the relevant properties. Likewise, Donatello is an instance of the artist object with the relevant properties. And all of this was to show that indeed, this constructor function is doing its job of acting like an object template, where instances of the artist object can be created using that object template. Okay, so we've seen how this object template works. Now we get to this class of musician, which extends the artist. This class of musician is very much the same as the artist. It's serving as an object template. However, using the class keyword is syntactic sugar around the existing constructor function pattern in JavaScript. So the syntax is a little sweeter to read, in which case it's like sugar, hence syntactic sugar around the constructor function. Now it's telling that there's even a special constructor function within the class itself. It just so happens that this one has an extra argument of instrument. It calls super, which invokes the parent constructor, which in this case is going to be that artist constructor function. And then it attaches the instrument argument to a property on this object, very much like this.name and this.talent within the constructor function. To dig into this, let's get rid of Monet and Donatello. They've done their job of serving as examples for us. And let's go ahead and uncomment that Frank object. Let's also log the Frank object, and let's check out what Frank looks like. So we're going to have first Frank as a string, if I can spell it correctly. Oh man, there we go. And then Frank, the object itself. And here we go. We have Frank, the musician, name Frank Sinatra, talent singer, instrument voice. Cool. All right. So far, this has been pretty straightforward. We've been able to create instances of these various objects, both musician and the regular artist object itself. So now we arrive at the meat of the question. Object.prototype.info equals function and console.log this. Now, before we get into what it means to attach something to the prototype, let's figure out what it means to console.log this. So let's go ahead and copy that. We're going to manually set an info method within the class using the class namespace method syntax, and then go ahead and add that log of this within info. So once you have that, log frank.info, and you'll see that this object represents the owner object itself. It's the instance of the musician object, which is Frank Sinatra. Cool. So we can even have this within the function artist, because musician extends artist and receives all of those properties from the artist object itself. So this doesn't have to be within the class. This could also be set within here as a property and method within the artist object. So set this to a function expression, and then move that console.log of this into that function expression. And what you're going to find is that this.info does the same thing. It logs the musician object, except there's also that info part over here, because now it's being directly attached as a property of the object itself. But the thing is, it wasn't added as a class method, nor was it added as a property within the base artist constructor. Instead, the info method was added as a property of the object prototype. So to figure out how this is working, let's actually copy this artist constructor function into the clipboard, and then go to an instance of your browser development console, and then go ahead and paste in that artist constructor function. All right. Now, the very first thing to access is going to be the artist.prototype. And what you're going to find is an object which contains a constructor function, and that is the constructor function itself for that artist object. You can use that artist prototype constructor function in place of the artist constructor in order to make new instances of the artist. For example, we can again create Monet by now saying new artist.prototype.constructor, and we're going to pass in relevant values, so Monet and painter. So now we have an instance of Monet, and this was created directly using the artist prototype.constructor. Now, the prototype is a very special property within JavaScript objects, because all descendants and instances of the object itself will receive whatever is contained within that prototype, which means Monet now has access to this constructor. If you type in monet.constructor, what you'll find is that it's the constructor for the artist function. What this means is that you can create instances of the artist object, or any object for that matter, using an instance itself. For example, we can recreate Donatello in this environment by using the Monet constructor. So new Monet.constructor, and the arguments are Donatello and then sculptor. All right. And as seen, Donatello is an instance of the artist object. Now, this prototype is dynamic. We can add new properties and methods to it. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the console, but then I'm going to add something to the artist prototype. So artist prototype.fans equals 100. Okay, now if you type in Monet dot, you're going to see something interesting. It has the constructor indeed, because it's inheriting that from the artist prototype, but it also has fans now. It has access to that value that was just set on the artist.prototype. This is revealing a detail about how prototype-based inheritance works in JavaScript. The methods from the parent prototype to its descendants and instances aren't manually copied when that instance is created. Instead, JavaScript does a lookup process to see if that method is available. So when you type in monet.fans, first it checks if that's directly attached on the instance. Now, it's not directly attached because only this .name and this .talent are defined on the instance itself. So then it looks in the prototype for its constructor, and its constructor is artist.prototype, and it finds that fans is defined there on the artist prototype. Therefore, it uses that value. So that is how the method lookup works within JavaScript for objects. Okay, now we've seen how to look at the prototype for a constructor function to see what all descendants and instances of the artist are going to get. But what if you want to look the other way around? For example, I want to see the parent prototype of this Monet object? Well, for that, in the browser environment, you can use the underscore underscore proto underscore underscore method. And that will return the prototype of the relevant constructor. Now, the cool part about this proto method is that you can use it to walk up the prototype chain. See, the artist constructor isn't started from scratch. It actually inherits a relevant prototype. To dig into that, we can look at the parent prototype of the artist itself by chaining another .protocol. This one returns an object with a bunch of methods in it. But what's interesting is that the constructor for the object is within here. So the parent prototype of the artist prototype is the object, which means that the grandparent of the artist function itself is indeed object. So this gives us a clue for how the question is going to work when it attaches object.prototype.info to a function that does a console.log of this. Through the JavaScript lookup method, first it's going to try to find info as it's defined on the musician class. But info isn't there, so it looks at the parent, which is artist. But info isn't attached there either. So it looks at the artist prototype, and then info isn't defined, so then it tries one last time at the object prototype, and it should find that info is now defined. And because of the fact that the prototype is dynamic, and JavaScript does a lookup method and doesn't copy the properties of the prototype itself, well, frank.info should run this relevant function. So if we uncomment this, what we should see is that frank.info does a relevant log of this, and it should print out the details about the whole musician object itself with the instrument, the name, and the talent. All right, moment of truth. Let's see how this is going to work. And indeed, this is logged, and it's the musician. It's Frank Sinatra with the singer and the voice. Overall, it can be pretty illuminating to dig into how the method lookup pattern works through prototypes in JavaScript. It's why when you try to access a method on an object, all of these various methods are going to show up. These methods are coming from the object prototype. Things like value of to locale string and has own property, those are defined in the object prototype. To verify that, you can do .proto and then .proto again, and you'll see that all those methods are the ones that are available from the object prototype. Now, the object prototype is at the root of pretty much any data type within JavaScript, which is why you'll see has own property, toString, etc. for all the various values that you set up. Okay, I hope this has helped reinforce how the prototype-based inheritance pattern works in JavaScript. And if anything, if you get a question like this that goes into prototypes in an interview, well, you're going to pass with flying colors. All right, I'll see you in the next video.